let's start. So we'll start with Shulchan Aruch Yoreh De'ah. We'll sort of dive right in. We'll see a few early, Shulchan Aruch era sources, and then we'll see some later sources as well. Okay, Shulchan Aruch 114, 4. All such drinks. Kol elu mashkim v'chen achomet shel shechar asor liknoto. You can't buy these drinks from Gentiles. Im demem yikarim midmeh hayayin shanu koshishim shem irav behen yayin. If they're anything that costs more than wine, but wine might be mixed into it, you can't buy from Gentiles because they might be mixing wine into it, unless there's 60 times to nullify the wine. That's the Mordechai name of the Rav Yah. The Medri Marim we're talking about. Shemachrim v'chanut, when they buy it in the store. Well, imro esh shemotziino tov v'chavit mutar v'lo chashin and shema irev bo yain shim hayam irev yain v'chavit hayam mitkalkel. They wouldn't put wine into a barrel of beer or liquor because it would just ruin. Even if wine were cheaper, because it would ruin the mixture if they pour it into the barrel. Yeah.
Is the concern here that someone might mix this because they're trying to skimp on what they're selling you?
Exactly. Precisely. If wine is cheaper, which I guess it almost always would be by volume compared to liquor. So they might adulterate their liquor with wine. And if you just get a glass in the tavern, you have to be worried about that if wine is cheaper. But if you're buying from the barrel, you see them have the barrel of whatever it is, you're not going to worry because they're not going to pour the wine into the barrel. That would be ruined. Okay. That's the Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah says, even though they have the custom to kind of smooth out the vats and then rub into it with pig fat, with lard. Not to worry, it always harkens back to a few weeks ago, the taste of the lard on the whiskey in the barrel is going to be a negative taste, a greasy taste, okay? And therefore, the taste alone is not going to be a problem, right? Taste is only a problem if it's a positive taste, but not if it is a negative taste. Furthermore, it's also going to be nullified in 60 times its volume. I'm also not worried if they put these drinks, other alcoholic beverages, into wine vessels of some kind, like barrels. And you can see on 136 where they put blood or other prohibited foods into salt or into ink, if that's permissible or not. Okay. So here it seems to be pretty, grounds for leniency from the taste alone. We don't seem to be concerned about it. So we have to figure out that's okay. This is continuing on. That was 114.4. This is 114.6. So it's two seifim later. Right? The Shulchan Aruch divided into 4 parts. Each of the parts are divided into simanim. I don't know how we'd call that in English. It's a pericope or something. I don't know what the word. Okay, section. Okay, and each section has subsections. Okay, so in Hebrew it's siman and seif, and then if it's a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, those are called seif katan. Siman, seif, seif katan. The seif katan, the seifim katanim, are numbered throughout by the siman, not by the seif. So if you have 6 seifim in a siman, like here this is the 6th seif in siman 114. If you were to look at the commentaries, they'd be numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12, straight through all these 6 seifim. So that's why. So a citation for a commentary in the Shulchan Aruch would just give you siman and then the seif katan number. So Magen Avraham number 46 in siman 114, for example. Okay, right. So. If you're concerned about alcoholic drinks and the made from honey that the non-Jews have made, if there's wine yeast that is used in them. And the Ramah says, and you can't purchase them if they use wine-based yeasts in these other alcoholic beverages, unless there's 60 times the volume to nullify the wine-based yeast. This is only in such a situation where these yeasts are not intended to impart a taste onto the alcoholic beverage. If it imparts a taste, isn't nullified even 1,000 times its volume, which makes a lot of sense. 60 times the nullification of 60, which is a general rule in kashrut, is a rule that is based on a presumption that anything is nullified, and the taste is nullified in 60 times its volume. You can't, if we're concerned about the taste, right? So with 60 times its volume, nothing can be tasted, unless you have a certain pepper, okay, garlic powder, saffron, you have a few, certain spices, for example, where a tiny little amount imparts a big taste. That's the point. That's why you're adding them. And then even they would never be nullified because the assumption is the taste can be imparted. So that's what these shmarim are doing. If the taste is perceptible, then that would be a problem, no matter what the volume is. So this raises a challenge. Okay, so now the Taz says as follows. This is the Taz is a commentary.
From what time period?
16th century. So maybe 17th century. 18th century. After the Shulchan Aruch. I don't know. Within 200, Shulchan Aruch is like the 1500s. So the Taz, I think, is the 1600s or 1700s. Tameni lama hutzrach shishim hakaimelan b'shishim b'siman kuf lamed dalet tivhei de yain v'mayim batel b'shisha chalakim v'uadin b'ashar mashkim dezet pashut temavatlim tam hayayin yoter mimayim. So why is 60? It should be 6 times. We learned elsewhere that wine, unlike other substances, is nullified in 60 times water. This is in terms of you don't say a bre priagafen if the wine is nullified in 6 times its water in water. So that's a more lenient standard for taking away the status of wine. And that's maybe water is 6 times, but other substances it should be even easier to nullify. It's actually a question. Maybe water ruins the wine more. Or maybe a stronger taste, like something like whiskey, would nullify the wine even more because it has even a stronger taste. So that's what he discusses. He and the Taz here says 66 times. Next source, which I didn't have John to translate, this is the Magen Avraham. Magen Avraham is another comment in the Shulchan Aruch from around the same time period. So the underlying part of the Fi Mashkutav Taz, B'Yordei Sim Kuf Yadam and Siv Katzin Dal, that's up above. Yain B'Shar Mashim Nami Batel B'Vav Chalakim Yan Sham. The linear read the dafka mayim shemafsidin pogmim hayayin v'ashar mashkim shar she'en pogmim kokach. Okay. So he says maybe there's a different. Maybe he sort of lays it out. The Taz, which we just saw, says 6 times water will nullify wine in 6 times its volume, and even more so something else. Whereas maybe actually it's water alone that will nullify wine in 6. Whereas other substances, maybe the wine like mixes in a nice way, and so it would nullify the wine. And so you can't assume that the rule for water applies to other things as well. Okay. 98.8, I think we don't have to see. This is basically the idea that we saw already, just that things that are apparent, things that give taste, they are not nullified even when there's 60 more because the taste is apparent. That's another source for that. Okay. Rabbi Bleich published wouldn't be concerned with the yeast in the same way as rennet. But yeah, yeast. Joel asked if the yeast is a ma'amid. I had that thought, right? I don't know if you asked that question a few minutes ago. Sorry. That's a very good question. Is the yeast like a ma'amid? Like the yeast, if the yeast is put into the honey liquor to make it ferment, then wouldn't it be like rennet or like any other curdling agent or something like or yeast that you're putting into bread like chametz, that's. Or I think shmarim is different though from. I had that thought. I think shmarim is not maybe maybe yeast isn't a perfect translation. I think that if it's seor, like sour, which is like causing a fermenting agent, I think that would be true. I think shmarim here might be like the dregs, like the stuff at the bottom of your wine glass sometimes, which is not quite. So I don't know. I'm not. The question I thought of that and I don't know the answer, but sure. So either it's something different.
I'm nearly certain shmarim is used in modern Hebrew to mean yeast.
Shmarim in modern Hebrew is yeast. I'm just wondering how it's different from seor, and if it is an agent that causes the fermentation, why would it not? Oh, so here's another possibility. Maybe it is the agent. Maybe it is a yeast that causes fermentation, but it's called zev izagorem, which comes up later. Zev izagorem is when you have 2 causes of the same thing, and that's a grounds for leniency because there's yeast in the atmosphere, and all these liquids will ferment on their own if you But that's true for bread as well. Bread will also rise in itself. So I don't know.
Yeah, because I think Rabbi did in Vayikra where it tells you not to
Yeah, that's soor. Soor. That
add
it,
yeah,
soor.
sour is used in
Yeah.
Vayikra bait, and
Yes.
I think it's translated as leavening.
Yes, that is correct. Shmarim does, Marim means yeast. So why is it not nullified? I don't know. We'll look it up. We'll look it up. Okay. You can see if you, Joe, if you want to take a look at the commentaries there and see if they deal with it. If you want to look at click on you have the Safari link. They're all live. You can just check and see what comes up there. Rabbi Wolkenfeld wrote an article, 20 years ago in tradition, more than 20 years ago in tradition, which he sort of quotes some of the 20th century debates about whiskeys. The original debate in the 1960s was about blended whiskeys in which wine was actually added into the whiskey itself. And there too, though, there are lenient positions. If you accept in that case, it really depends. Is it 60 times, or is it the Magen Avraham or the Taz or the Shach and the Taz? Shach also, is it 60 or is it 6? If it's 6 times, it would be fine because there's more than 6 times whiskey to the wine that would add to the blended whiskeys. If it's 60 times, there might not be 60 times. It could be 140 was the volume of wine that was possibly added to blended whiskey. So most of the discussion is around actual wine being actually added into these blended whiskeys in the 60s. And even there, Rabbi Mednick this back and forth occurred in the journal Hapardes, which was produced in Chicago. It was like a rabbinic journal in early 20th century. Rabbi Teitz in Elizabeth, New Jersey was strict. Rabbi Mednick in Chicago was lenient. Moshe Feinstein eventually weighed in, and so did the Minchat Yitzchak with Diane Weiss. So the first paragraph here is from Rabbi Bleich's tradition article. I subsequently added the next are from the Rabbi Bleich then wrote a book, which Contemporary Halachic Problems, Volume 5, which is on Sefaria. So I just took the paragraphs from Sefaria for the book that it's just a collection of his articles in tradition. He writes an article he writes 4 articles a year in tradition, and then when he has enough, he publishes them as a book. So the books are on Sefaria. So this paragraph, he edits them. So I like the way it's phrased in this paragraph, so I kept it in this paragraph. The rest I just put it. Okay, so Rabbi Chaim Medek of Chicago concedes that according to the authorities who maintain that wine is treated as all other forbidden foods insofar as nullification liquids other than water is concerned, blended whiskey cannot be regarded as acceptable because you need 60 times because it's not water. It's only water that nullifies it in 6. And even that context is like a bracha context, right? Okay. However, argues Rabbi Mednick, the authorities who rule that wine is nullified in 6 parts of the liquid maintain that position, not because the taste of the wine cannot be detected in such mixtures or because wine in that proportion mars the taste of the beverage, but because in their view, only beverages that are identifiable as wine are usable for idolatrous libations, and accordingly, mixtures that do not have that characteristic are not included in the ban. Consequently, argues Rabbi Mednick, even if the wine is utilized as a flavoring agent, the mixture is permissible. Okay, so let's go back and talk about what's the problem with wine anyway. The Talmud assumes that Gentiles are Greco-Roman, the random Gentile of the Talmud is a Greco-Roman pagan, and the assumption was before they would drink wine, they would pour a little bit as libation to some idolatrous god. And so the wine that they had handled, an open barrel, an open cup, a glass, they had presumably poured some of that wine as a libation. And the wine itself was called Yenesech, was wine offered as an idolatrous, and that wine is prohibited to drink. It's also prohibited to get benefit from it. It's a very severe prohibition. And that's the whole Talmud's discussion of wine is basically when does the wine become Yenesech? And the assumption is the Gentiles, even if you can't see them, they're always just pouring their wine for idolatry.
My friends.
Well, here's the thing. Centuries go by, and the Tosafot realize that, but first of all, centuries go by and wine becomes a major industry, economic commodity in medieval Europe. There was water was not safe to drink, and so they drank wine. There was alcohol was a way to preserve carbohydrates in a time without refrigeration or granaries that were steel granaries. So if you wanted to store your calories and store carbohydrate, you would turn it to alcohol, and then you could store it long term. So it's just as a basic form of nutrition and keeping your population fed, you would turn your agricultural produce into alcohol to preserve it. And so the Egyptians drank beer, and beer was drank in Northern Europe. They drank beer, but in Southern and Central Europe, they drank wine because there wasn't no safe drinking water, and it was like a very reliable way to again preserve calories. And sugar gets turned to carbohydrates, and you can like keep it in your cellar for years and years, and you have a source of carbohydrates that would not otherwise be easily available in medieval Europe. They drank a lot of wine, and we know this from you could read like the monks would wrote about what they drank every day and they drank a lot of wine. Okay, they took a vow of poverty and they still drank like several bottles a day. Like people were probably a little bit drunk most of the time, and they also built up a tolerance, and that's what they did. So Jews, of course, needed to, and Jews were very heavily involved in the wine trade. It was like a major industry. Jews also needed to make our own wine for Kiddush purposes, because we couldn't drink other wine. And so Chaim Soloveitchik thinks this is like a central point of like medieval Jewish history, like how we think Jews maybe brought wine to France and Germany. It's like not so easy to grow grapes in temperate climates. It's really a subtropical plant. He wrote like 2 books on this topic, which I was going to bring them to show you, but I forgot. But there's a lot written about this. The historical piece of it. And the halacha, there's also like a real important leniency that the Ashkenazi halachic tradition introduces regarding winemaking. What stage in the winemaking process have to be undertaken only by Jews? Like, when are you worried about? You can have the Gentiles be in your vat stomping the grapes, but once you start taking the juice out, then they might offer it as libations. Then it becomes stricter. For example, so that's like one like halachic sort of innovation of medieval Ashkenaz that was sort of born by necessity. Okay, but at this time, they also realize that they're not living amongst Greco-Roman pagans. Jews are living among Christians who are not offering wine libations to idolatry. Jews in the Sephardic world are living among Muslims who aren't drinking wine at all and not worshiping any god, right? And in this period, there's sort of an elevation as Yenesech, as the fear that Gentiles are actually offering libations recedes, a alternative Talmudic tradition that the prohibition against Gentile wine is a prohibition to prevent fraternization and intermarriage, kind of is elevated by the Balei HaTosafot, the Tosafists, and this concept is called that they develop that comes from this is called Stam Yenam, which Stam meaning like generic wine, and Stam Yenam has a distinct halachic status. You can't drink it, but you are allowed to derive benefit from it. And this allowed Jews to accept debts in wine and to trade in wine, again, which was like a major medieval European industry. This is all to say, I guess, Rabbi Medik is sort of saying, let's just go back to what this prohibition, right? We have and then so maybe this is like a separate, according to the Tosafot, it seems like a distinct rabbinic prohibition against wine that Gentiles have handled and touched, but not libated, is a rabbinic prohibition. And the rabbinic prohibition maybe is really on wine that has the symbolic importance of fraternization that could have been offered as an idolatrous libation, right? So, and for that reason, the mere taste of a wine residue in a barrel or something, or a blended whiskey, that's not like, well, the product is whiskey, not wine. And I'm tasting tasting a blend that has like a little wine, perhaps a subtle wine flavor that I can't really perceive, but it's not. That's not wine. That's not what the rabbis told us not to drink with. Yeah.
Do they never come up with a whiskey?
Yeah, it's interesting. So it seems that there are some discussions about drinking alcohol in the presence of, like, it's sort of odd, right? Because we don't. It's a little bit. We're a little bit formalistic. No, not formalistic. Formalistic, where we say, well, they said, like it's we can't drink wine that Gentiles pour because we might, leads to intermarriage, but we can hang out in the bar with our, college roommates and their friends and have beer all to our heart's content, right? So it's a little, sometimes the formalism of like, well, this is what the rule is, and that's not that, and it sometimes leads to situations which are, maybe not so wise and not so. But again, beer, people had to drink something, right? Jews were, if you're a merchant, if you're traveling, you go to an inn, you stay somewhere. Again, it wasn't like necessarily, it wasn't like tap water, there wasn't chlorinated, clean, safe water. And, beer was like for calories even. And, this was so. Okay. So now this is Rabbi, the next, okay, bottom of page 3, this is now Rabbi Leich from his published book, okay? The argument that when utilized for the purpose of imparting flavor to another food or beverage, wine does not become nullified is refuted by Igor Moshe. Did I bring it? Yeah. So Igor Moshe, this is Moshe Feinstein, died 1980s, 85, I think 86. Right from Russia. I think we've quoted him, I think in just about every class so far. And so he weighed in on this question in response to this exchange with Rabbi Medic and Rabbi Teitz, and he comes out leniently. On the basis of the discussion of the Gemara in Bava Batra, the Gemara describes a process of soaking pressed grapes in water, as a result of which the quantity of grape-flavored liquid recovered at the end of the process somewhat greater than the quantity of water poured over the grape residue at the outset. The phenomenon is clearly attributable to the fact that residual liquid naturally present in the grapes is leached out of the pulp by the water that is added. Since this occurs by design, the process is obviously undertaken in order to extract the remaining juice from the grape dregs in order to flavor the water, which is then fermented in order to produce a type of wine. Whew. The Gemara explains that for purposes of tithing and pronouncement of the appropriate blessing, you don't say and the liquid is not deemed to be wine, despite the fact that the taste of grapes is clearly perceived by the palate. So it's sort of a alcoholic grape water. The Gemara explains that the underlying principle in declaring, do you think it's wine? It's mere acid, kiyuha. Tosfot there describe the grapes detritus from which the wine is produced as mere soil. So somehow, which makes sense because the symbol, right, like wine as a symbolic substance of great symbolic meaning could be used for libations, or it can be a romantic beverage that cements a relationship, and this alcoholic grape water is not that. And so, okay, Kool-Aid, right? It's like okay. Next, Rabbi Weiss. This is Rabbi Weiss. This is Yitzchak Isaac Weiss, the Minchat Yitzchak, reports that one of his colleagues contended that the wine added to blended whiskey cannot be designed to flavor the whiskey, for were the taste of wine actually detectable in the whiskey, observant Jews would long have been aware of the problem and would have refrained from drinking such whiskey. Okay, it can't be, like, can't just invent a new prohibition. We've been drinking these blended whiskeys for years. Rabbi Weiss asserts that the principle of the taima avida, it's like done to impart flavor, that nullification does not occur when the prohibited foodstuff is designed to impart taste, is not limited to situations in which the taste of the prohibited foodstuff is identifiable as that of the prohibited foodstuff. Rather, it also includes situations in which the forbidden foodstuff merely modifies and enhances the flavor of the mixture. Okay, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be like, oh, I can taste the wine in this, or I can, oh, right. No, it also tastes different and better. That would still be a problem, even if I can't name the source of the taste. It's still, right? That makes sense. Thus, the principle of nullification applies only when the taste of the forbidden foodstuff is entirely submerged, with the result of the taste of the dominant ingredient or ingredients is no different from the taste of the same food product, absent the admixture of the small quantity of forbidden substance. The taste of wine per se may not be detectable in Scotch whiskey, but contends Rabbi Weiss the taste of Scotch aged in wine casks is different from that of Scotch not aged in wine casks, since the flavor of Scotch aged in wine casks is transformed and beneficially enhanced. Result of the process, the taste of the wine cannot be deemed to this. That's a reason to be strict. Nonetheless, in section 16 of his responsum, Rabbi Weiss finds grounds for such whiskey precisely because the resultant taste attributed to the wine is not a wine flavor, but entirely new taste. His argument is technical and complex, but warrants thorough consideration. So it's not. So what is it? It's a new taste that is like it's the sort of wine in the barrel over time creates some sort of new flavor, which is not the result of the wine itself. And so you can't taste the wine, and whatever flavor enhancement you're tasting is the mixture of the wine and wood over time as that transforms the whiskey. Since the wine in question is prohibited only by virtue of rabbinic edict, and since the taste of the wine itself is not discernible by the palate, the taste that it does impart, argues Minchat Yitzchak, must, according to Rashba, be forbidden only as a davar hama'amid. However, the novel taste imparted by the whiskey to the whiskey is not the product of the wine alone. The taste that is generated, argues Minchat Yitzchak, is the product of multiple ingredients, including the wood of the cask itself, which is often oak, no single one of which is itself discernible. Accordingly, argues Minchat Yitzchak, the resultant flavor has the status of a permissible zev zagorim. We have two causes, the forbidden and the permissible. Tosfot in Daf 30 maintain that it is entirely permissible to know nuts. So another issue would be, what about nullification, intentional nullification, bitzel isur lechatchila? We discussed that also. You're not allowed to intentionally nullify something, right? We talked about that. When we talked about milk, maybe, or no, I don't know. You can't intentionally nullify something. Okay, even less than you can't put less than 60 times. Okay, right? It's called bittul isur lechatchila. Okay, so generally not a concern with products that are commercial products because they're non-Jews making it for non-Jews. Tosfos maintains that it is entirely permissible to nullify substances forbidden by rabbinic edict that is unrelated to a biblical prohibition. So this prohibition. So wine that has not been handled by an idolater is prohibited not because of fear that it has been used for an idolatrous libation, as evidenced by the fact that although it is not permitted to drink such wine, other forms of benefit may be derived therefrom. So clearly, we don't think that there was libation, but because social intimacy promoted by sharing wine may lead to intermarriage. Okay, makes dancing. The prohibition against drinking such wine is entirely rabbinic in origin, and hence, according to Tosfos, it is permissible to nullify such wine by adulterating with other substances. So, if it's not stam yainam, it's just generic wine, not wine that was actually libated, used for libations. Novel, new rabbinic prohibition, and therefore it can be intentionally nullified. Although this opinion is not normative, Rambam Tilchat Malachat Asirot maintains permitted to nullify all rabbinically prohibited substances. Taking collectively the Sturz Moshe, these considerations serve as ample basis to vitiate a prohibition against the purchase of blended whiskey containing wine that has been nullified by adulteration. Okay, so it's this intentional nullification is fine because it's a rabbinic prohibition and under those circumstances. So most of this is, I sort of gave you all of the Igros Moshe. We actually then had it's a fairly lengthy tshuva, just to get a sense of how long it is. He then has two other similarly length tshuvot defending this position and sort of going. So there's additional back and forth. So it's not just 61; it's also 62 and 63. Sorry, not just 62. But also 63 and 64 are also the same topic, and there are multiple chapters. So he has a lot to say, ends up having a lot to say about it. But most of the arguments, I think, or many of the arguments are summarized in the by Rabbi Wolkenfeld in the sections I've shown you. So there's 63 is actually even longer. 63 is Od B'Inyan Hanal, so more on this matter, and 64 is more on this matter as well. And also, they're all written to the same person. They're all written to Rabbi Teitz. So there's the really, So he really took it seriously, but he defended his position again and again and again. Okay, one little bit. I should show you this that I underlined on page 7. He says, Zehu Ladina, this, what I've said above, I'm sorry, I missed your comment. What about trading whiskey with the wine? Yeah, that would certainly be, Carly, that would be fine for sure. In other words, the only, even wine itself you can trade. You just can't, you can't trade yay nesech, okay? If the wine was actually libated, which I think is really, I don't think that happens anymore, right? This comes up, the libation, this comes up in some of these, the Indian restaurants or something, or certain forms of Hinduism where they have a little.
They have libations, but they're not usually wine based.
They do the food, right? Or they put the food maybe.
Yeah.
So that would be a problem. Like some of these, that's like, what could be the problem with a vegan restaurant? So one thing that could be the problem is that the waiters are like offering a little bit of the food to the statue before they bring it to the table, in which case the food is tikrovah avodah zarah. It's actually, it's even more prohibited than normal trade, because not only can you eat it, you're also not allowed to benefit from it, or right? So that's a kind of. Yeah. Wow. Cool. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Real avodah zarah. All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Did you down and okay. Yes, Barry.
Is libating a particular process, or
what
makes something libated as opposed to just alcohol or whatever?
Libation is it's like a korban with liquid.
I know that I know that libation. I know that there's a wine libation in the korbanot, but or associated with the korbanot, with the meal or whatever. But I mean the process that makes the wine libated. Is that a particular process, or is it any kind of alcoholic wine?
No. That means that the Gentile who took his glass of wine, and he poured a little bit in front of his idol, and as a offering, and then gave you the glass to drink from. That's the concern of the Talmud. that the
Okay.
whether they pour it on the floor, and there's a if you read the novel As a Driven Leaf. Do you ever?
No,
Okay. Yeah, okay. So by what's his name? Doesn't matter. What?
okay.
Yes, exactly. So, anyways, there's a novel from the 50s or 60s called As a Driven Leaf, which is a historical novel about Elisha ben Abuya. And there's a scene where he's befriends a Gentile woman, and she, or maybe it's, I don't know, I'm missing this confusing scene. She takes some wine, and she pours it off into the ground as an offering to the gods. And he goes, "Oh, this is Yenesek. Now I understand with me. Okay, we're always okay. So now I know." So, in any event, that doesn't happen anymore, right? So the wine that the Stam Yenam is really just it's a Durvana, and it's about fraternization. Anyway, okay, so back in the underlined part on page 7. Zeladina val bal nefesh yeshlo lahachmir al atzmo mitzad kamach shashav. So everything I said above, which is lenient, that is for the basic. But a bal nefesh, somebody who's particularly sensitive religiously, should be strict for himself for many reasons. Chada. Wow, there's a whole series that say even samyanam, even wine that was not libated, the sort of generic wine that Gentiles have been kind of, that also has a benefit prohibition. And even the lenient ones, maybe that's only in a case of loss. Like, yeah, you can derive benefit from this Gentile wine if they're paying back the money they owe you in the form of wine, and for example, right? So, but normally, like, don't derive benefit from it. Again, the Tas, Sivkatan Sham, Sivkatan Bed, Vashach, Siman, Kuf Chavdal, Sivkatan Ayin Aleph, Ve'imken, Lamash Be'arti, Shiesh Adam Hana, Memayim, Shnatan Lasham, Mi-8 Yain, De Beshvil Ze Noten, Ve'gam Lo Nachish HaMetziut Shehu, Mut'am Yoter Beshvil HaYain, Lo Gara Mitam, Kiyuha Mihana Bi'alma Shasor. That again. But I explained the person has benefit from the water that wine was put into because of this reason. That's why they put it in, because it's better. So in other words, it's not. People seem to like it more. That's why they do it. Yeah,
but it's an interesting paradigm. As you pointed out, he's writing page after page after page, saying this is permissible.
Yeah.
And we're talking about something that in the 20th century is not a necessity.
Yeah.
It's not something that is widely traded and there's important commercial value which you're trying to balance. So he spends page after page. It's fine. But then he goes on to say, but if you want to be strict, there's a billion different reasons why you really shouldn't do this anyway.
Yeah.
Why does he spend the first page after page?
So look, it could
look. He is creating a schism.
I think probably the common practice among observant Jews was they drank blended whiskey, and Jews were involved. The whiskey business was actually a Jewish business. Correct. Fine.
Yeah, exactly.
But Jews were drinking it, so to come out and say that what you've all been doing and your parents have been doing for a generation or more is actually forbidden, that's like a challenging thing to do because people may not listen to you and then it's worse off. So the job of the posek is to figure out the practice of pious Jews who are struggling to observe mitzvot in mid-century America, and like the job of the scholar is to deploy your scholarship to explain why it's permissible. I think that's one piece of it. And I think it's also okay to have there's like all these reasons why the taste is really nullified and it's a drabbanan and therefore it's mixed with the wood and that that's all we're entitled to rely on that. But it's also one's entitled to be a bal nefesh. You're like, I don't want to rely on that. Generally, it's a story from my teacher of Amital Zatzal said that when he was a yeshiva student in Hungary before the war, they would read the Mishnah Berurah also very often would say bal nefesh, particularly pious, sensitive person should refrain from X, Y, and Z. And when the yeshiva in Hungary, when they read those phrases, bal nefesh, somebody like the Mishnah Berurah, shouldn't do the activities. And now, he's writing in, 2 generations later, yeshiva student, 18-year-old kids are reading the Mishnah Berurah and they, oh, well, I'm about nefesh, I should also refrain from this kind of behavior. So, and I think Rav Amital was saying that was not necessarily a positive thing, that every little pisher thinks that he's, on this level that it's appropriate to adopt these stricter policies. And it's okay that, like, to be upon that. You're a very sensitive person. I don't want to live my life relying on these leniencies. It's also okay to rely on leniencies because they're there. The kashrut, as we'll see, the kashrut agencies, they don't like to rely on any form of nullification. That's actually a big difference between, they won't give a hechsher to something that where nullification is relevant, even if nullification is halachic. That's generally a across-the-board policy of the major kashrut agencies. They just feel we're not going to put a stamp on something that uses nullification. And so they sort of have, it's a universal bal nefesh kind of standard.
Because they're not going for the lowest common denominator. They want to make sure that people that are being very strict are comfortable.
I guess, I think the downside is that, like there's certain products which, you're trying to find a hechsher for, canned, frozen cauliflower florets, or, whatever, pasta, rice, or, canned garbanzo beans, whatever, and you can't find a hechsher on the thing that you're looking for. And it, so you sort of left to sort of, it's probably fine, right? Like it's almost certainly fine, many or most of these products. But we should have left to our own devices, right? Without much guidance from the agencies, because by adopting that strict standard, we're left.
For years, there were no
Correct. Yeah. And many of the products don't need them, and many of the products needed them. And the industrial food is much more complicated now. So that's, for sure. It's, yeah. Okay. We have a few more sources. Okay. Let's get through. All right. Minchat Asher. This is not my translation. I found this, but Minchat Asher is Rav Asher Weiss, who is a living posek. He is I've never met. It's like my goal for my next trip to Israel is to meet Rav Asher Weiss. He puts out weekly YouTube Divrei Torah in Hebrew and in English on the Parsha, on current events, on he has every week is like a Parsha booklet he publishes with a halachic essay and a essay on Agadah, all based on the Parsha. And he's now, I think, put out 3 or 4 volumes of Sheilot Teshuvot. Really, and he has he's like the house posek for the Hasidic court in Netanya. Who's the Kloisenberg? The other one, Kloisenberg. Thank you, Kloisenberg. He is the right. He is the house posek for the Kloisenberger Rebbe. That's his. He grew up in the Kloisenberger context. Okay, so he says this. So all right, it's a whole big sugya in Avodah Zarah 33. Rav Zvid bar Oshia taught that if one buys new barrels from idolaters, you can put wine in them. If one buys old barrels, you can put brine, pickling solution, in them in the first place. And the Rishonim disagreed on how to explain this discussion. According to Rashi, they allowed brine and pickling juice because their sharpness burns out and ruins the flavor of the wine in the idolater's barrel. So for Tosfot holds, they permitted all other beverages other than wine because wine becomes ruined in other beverages and its flavor is thus nullified in them. In other words, you put anything in those barrels, not just brine that will, but you put whiskey even. I mean, whiskey wasn't invented in the time of the Talmud. Whiskey was not invented in the time of the Talmud. Whiskey is distillation is a modern invention, right? But it's an industrial process. But you put any liquid other than wine in those barrels, whatever taste the wine imparts in the liquid will be lifgam and will be okay. And it seems to me that in our case, the whiskey is permitted according to all the opinions, for the whiskey too is sharp, and it makes sense to say that it should be treated the same way as brine or pickling juice or beer, strong flavored liquid that will overpower whatever wine flavor leaches from the barrels. I know that those who wish to be strict on this issue will say, but the reality demonstrates that in our case, the flavor of the wine is not nullified. On the contrary, it improves the whiskey. That's right. However, it seems to me that this conclusion is mistaken. Are we to uproot a clear Talmudic discussion and the views of the Rishonim and Shulchan Aruch based on what appears to be the reality? To not even mention such a thing, just because some distiller, on their advertising copy says, thinks that we're going to be impressed by the fact that aged in wine casks makes it taste better. The Talmud tells us it doesn't. So who cares, right? Who cares? Who are you gonna listen to? The Talmud or the Glenn Morangi marketing? Yeah. Rather, obviously, we are forced to explain this in one of two ways and to reach one of two conclusions. One, the flavor of the wine does not improve the whiskey, for even the experts in those sensitive flavors disagree about whether the wine flavors enhance the whiskey. And to most of the world, the flavor is not sensed at all. Okay, so you have to be really pretty refined palate to taste the difference. And even if you do, you might not like it better. Some say better, some say worse. Some prefer one. So it's not like an obvious enhancement. And two, even if the whiskey is improved, this is not because of the flavor of the wine and its excretions. Rather, it's the result of the chemical reaction of the wood and the sherry, and this is not considered flavor. Okay, this is basically what the Mincha Yitzchak said, as we saw earlier. For in truth, I've written elsewhere that we do not find a thing that's considered flavor in halacha that only excretes after many years. Any flavor that only excretes after 12 years or so is not legally considered flavor. Tam is like, right? Tam in halacha generally, it's like, it's within 24 hours for most things. Maybe a sharp food can revive an old more than 24-hour tam, but you say you're going to leave it in there for 12 years. That's not tam as was understood by the Talmud. This is some chemical reaction of sherry and wood and whiskey over a period of time, and that's different there's a different dynamic. So the Mincha Asher is also lenient, as was Moshe Feinstein, as was the Mincha Yitzchak with Diane Weiss. London, I have here's the London Beit, and they say this was October 5th of this year. I guess they were anticipating a Simchas Torah or something. Ordinary Scotch. It's sort of interesting that the London Beit is lenient for all of the United Kingdom whiskeys, but they're but not the Irish, not the Irish. It's very interesting. Okay, ordinary Scotch, English, and Welsh whiskey, whether single malt or blended, without any mention of the use of sherry port or other wine casks on the label or marketing literature, can be consumed confidently without any halakhic concerns relating to the potential contact with X wine casks. No additives to these whiskeys are permitted, with the exception of caramel color, which is kosher. As for the Irish whiskey is concerned, as a direct result of the work of the KLVD, the London Beitin, with the distillers, Irish legislation has been changed. It is no longer permitted to add flavor enhancers, including those which are wine-based to Irish whiskey. Therefore, all whiskey bottled in Ireland since mid-2009, without any mention of the use of sherry, port, or other wine casks on the label or marketing literature, can also be consumed confidently without any halakhic concerns. Whiskey which has been matured in wine casks has been subject to detailed halakhic consideration by major poskim, including Minchas Yitzchak and Igros Moshe, who did not forbid its consumption, as we saw. There's a new process, however, known as wine cask finishes, as referred to as double or second maturation, which is in a secondary process in which fully aged wine, aged and mature whiskey is returned to specially commissioned and primed wine casks for a further period of maturation, a process some claim imparts a recognizable taste of the wine. This new process may not be covered by all the aforementioned heterim, and accordingly, some may wish to avoid products so labeled. I don't see why that is true. Like, I don't see why that would be different. I guess if you can clearly taste wine, and I can, if you can if you can clearly taste wine, because they're storing it in the wine barrels after you what?
We should probably
taste some more. Yeah. I don't know. That would be, but doesn't seem all that different. It seems like the same. Like Minchat Asher, certainly the Minchat Asher. I think his arguments would be equally valid as well for this new process. I don't, I think so. But again, just the general approach. The kashrut agencies, they don't rely on bit to let me think of a hechsher too, and they generally have adopted a fairly strict standard here. London Beitzit, I think, used to be a little more lenient. It's sort of interesting. I'm actually curious. My memory is that they were lenient for all of these scotches and Scotch whiskeys. But this is the most recent version that I was able to find. So it could just also be there's a consolidation. On the assumption that London Beitzin had been lenient, sort of reminded me of, like, you listen to the Manhattan rabbis for elevator, halachot on Shabbat, and you listen to the London Beitzin on some whiskey things. But so I think in recent years they have changed their standard. I wasn't able to find today, but I believe they used to be more lenient. But even here, they're not actually. They're quoting and marking on the grounds for leniency. So
It's interesting that the way they phrase it is do not forbid their consent, as opposed to saying
they permit it.
They're still hedging it back a little bit.
Yeah, it's right. It's an interesting phrasing, right? Well, look, look, we saw in Moshe. He says the Baal Nefesh. It's good to refrain from it. So okay, so I think that's sort of, it seems to me like a personal decision. If you want to remove some of these, going to remove some of these, reliance on bittul and some of these convoluted arguments from the food you eat. I think that's admirable, and so you can refrain from whiskey that is aged in wine casks. But I think you have, if not, I think you have. If you're a civilian Jew, I think it's fine to not to worry about that.
Would the London Beitin say that it is prohibited to permit the more lenient interpretation?
Yeah, I mean, look, you can see what they say. You can judge for yourself what they're trying to convey. And I don't know what they allow in restaurants or catering halls. Like, I don't know their policies. I would be interesting to, like, I wonder if this new process is what pushed them to be a little more strict. I wonder if they had been more lenient. I believe they were more lenient in recent years, but wasn't able to sort of verify.
That's 100% correct.
I'm sorry?
Your memory is 100% correct.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you for verifying memory. Okay, our time is up, and everyone's invited here to stay for Maariv. I'm gonna say l'chaim to everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We have a break with no class on Wednesday night for the next 2 weeks or so, and we'll start up again in January. I think we have some other people teaching in January. I think I'm doing some teaching in February, March, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay, thank you all. All right. Take care.